Hey, it's Jim, and this is level 2 of the CFA program, the topic on ethics and professional standards, and the extremely long module on guidance for standards 1 through 7. What we've done is divided each of those standards into separate recordings. So what we'll do today is the standard 1 on professionalism. And then there'll be 6 more recordings for you to watch as well. A couple of things before we get started. I'm not sure that I have any new or good advice on how level 3 standards of professional conduct exam questions are going to be that much different from what you've already been exposed to at level 1 and level 2. I will offer the following advice, though, and we're going to emphasize the end of the module questions. There's about 40 of them, so we're going to include a bunch of those on the slide decks, and then we have some of our own problems to go through. So my advice is to do exactly what I did years and years ago. I actually had a physical copy of the handbook, and I carried that around with me all the time. And when I had a few moments, I went ahead and got it out and just started reading. And that's probably what led me to pass this part of the exam. If in fact I did pass that part of the exam, I have no idea what my scores were. That's 20 years ago or so. Here are the learning outcome statements. These are the same that they've always been, and they apply to each of the professional standards. So we're going to have to demonstrate and recommend and evaluate. And then I think the better exam questions are one in which the question stem provides us with a scenario, and then we're asked whether the analyst violated one of these standards or part of the code. So let's go ahead and start with standard 1. Well, let me go back here real quick. And so there's standard 1, professionalism. Notice there's an A through E. This used to be just A through D, but this year they added E for competence. And then we'll have slide decks, as I mentioned a little bit ago. We'll have slide decks on every one of these 7 standards. So let's go ahead and start with the knowledge of the law. So here's the actual standard taken directly from the handbook. Notice we bolded a couple of terms there. We're supposed to understand, we're supposed to comply. And look down at the bottom there. I'm guessing that you remember this. Hopefully this slide deck will be just a little bit more of a review rather than an introduction to this concept. We've got about 50 slides in this slide deck. Clearly, lots of this should be reviewed, so it shouldn't take us too long to get through this. Now, this is what I was referring to just a moment or two ago, that we're going to start each standard with a question that's taken right out of the handbook so that you get a sense of what the Institute is thinking. Remember, this is a super long reading, as we said, and so almost anything can show up on the exam. But let's take the signal that the Institute provides us, and they say, look, these 39 or 40 questions are what we think are probably the most important questions that we've covered in this particular module. So it's my advice to make sure you know all of these 39 or 40 or so. So here's a really simple question. And I kind of like these. In fact, I use these on my exams as well, in almost all the exams that I create for my classes. Which of the following is the most correct or the most accurate statement? So we have choice A, B, and C. And this is a super obvious one here. In the absence of specific applicable law, the code and standards govern the members' or candidates' actions. All right, let's think about that for a second, but let's move on to B. A member or candidate is required to comply only with the applicable local laws. A member or candidate who trades securities where no applicable laws may take investment action based on material non-public information. All right, so you go through these, and the Institute is really clever in providing us with potential answers that sound perfectly reasonable. But my advice is to take a deep breath when you read the A, the B, and the C as you're going through the exam, and cross one off, cross 2 off, and then you're left with the third one here. Yeah, so my first response when I read that first part A was, that makes a lot of sense here. So, yeah. The code and standards govern the member or the candidate's actions. And there is the explanation down at the bottom. And the Institute is very good in providing us with answers and explanations to why B and C are not correct. So make sure that you read why it's correct and then why the other two are not correct. So what the Institute then does is it goes through, pages and pages of guidance. And so really, this is just a common sense way of looking at Standard 1A, knowledge of the law, but it's formalized here. All right, so remember, I say this regularly, and you're gonna hear me repeat this, that the Institute is not requiring us to be lawyers, but they are requiring us to, well, what does that action word say? The action words: understand, comply, acquaint, and comply. So if we're working in the United States and Ireland, well, then we need to figure out what the laws are in those two countries, and we need to comply with those laws, and we need to make certain that we read the Wall Street Journal every day so that we know what those changes in the laws or regulations are going to be. So what's this term here, this applicable law that the Institute likes to use? And of course, it's the more strict law. So sometimes the code and the standards are going to be more strict, and sometimes the country's laws are going to be more strict. And so we need to abide by whichever one is the stricter of those two. Yeah. Look at the second point there. Whenever there are no laws or regulations, then of course we must abide by the code and the standards, and we have to avoid conduct that is in violation of the code, especially if it happens to be illegal. All right, here's really good potential exam questions. We have these association with violation by others. And by others, that means a colleague inside of our firm, a client, or a supervisor. And so how do we handle knowledge of the law? It's not like we have to walk around with a law book and lecture all of our colleagues and our supervisors and our clients every day. But the standard applies to the simple fact that the members and the candidates, we should know, or at least know who to ask about potential violations of applicable laws. And so if we find some kind of violation, what we need to do is we need to call a timeout. I give lots and lots of sports analogies, but what the CFA Institute does is they don't call it a timeout, they call it dissociation. So we must immediately dissociate from the activity or the client or the supervisor or whatever else is out there that's going on. Now, of course, we need to be concerned about violations by others. These are the three others that I was referring to just a moment ago: colleagues, clients, or supervisors, or employers. And so notice the highlighted word in each of these arrow points is discussion. And this is what I run into at school all the time as an advisor. I have about 40 or 50 students that come to see me regularly about scheduling, but they also come to see me about problems with other professors. And so my first response to them is exactly what the Institute is suggesting for us. Go and have a visit with that professor. So I say, look at the syllabus. That's what we're doing here. We're looking at this Standard 1, knowledge of the law. I tell my students to look at the syllabus, find out what was expected of you, find out where you went wrong, and go talk to the professor. So direct discussion, direct discussion, direct discussion. That's always a correct answer on the exam. Now, if this discussion fails when you're talking about a colleague, then you need to bring it to the employer's attention. If this discussion fails when talking to a client, then you probably want to ask for a new assignment. And then you and your supervisor will probably have a conversation about what's the best way to proceed. Do we want to, send this somewhere else, or do we want to just tell the client to go take his or her capital and go to another firm if it gets to be something that's more serious? But generally, what I have found just anecdotally and, reading all the CFA Institute materials is that most times, the majority of the times, those first two scenarios, they probably resolve itself when there is a reasonable discussion. Now it gets super interesting down here when it is the employer. Here's the example that I think of. You guys know I love the James Bond movies. So imagine that Arik Goldfinger from that great Goldfinger movie comes to us with all these bars of gold, and he says to us, and we're sitting in a meeting with our supervisor, and Arik says, "Hey, I want you to take these gold bars and I want you to turn them into cash. And by the way, I want you to launder them. And by the way, I don't know where I got them and I don't want to tell you where I got them." And so when Arik leaves the office, you say to your supervisor, you say, "Hey, I happen to notice that you put one of those gold bars in your back pocket. Can you explain that behavior? And by the way, remind me, is laundering gold bars, is that legal or illegal?" So you can see how this can be a little bit more uncomfortable than those first two scenarios. And so, what are we going to do? We're going to dissociate here. We're going to say something like, "All right, we don't really want to have any part of this," especially if your supervisor says, "Oh, you know what? You didn't see me put that in the back pocket, and don't worry about the laundering or else you're going to be fired." Of course, those are extreme examples, and we have whistleblower laws to kind of protect us. But here, look at the very bottom, removing one's name from reports or recommendations. That's kind of an obvious notion. But then there's an extreme case if you leave the employer. So what does the Institute want us to do? Encourages members to report potential violations, and then you can submit a written report. And some of those reports you can find on the webpage when they have been what's the legal term? Adjudicated. I don't even know if I know what that word means. All right, so what do we need to do? We're going to create, and we're going to craft, and we're going to distribute, and we're going to sell all sorts of investment products like derivative securities and mortgage-backed securities, credit default swaps. So we need to make sure that our investment products are in compliance with these applicable laws. We need to make sure that our business partners, we need to make sure if we're going across border that we know all of this stuff. Look at the bottom blue box, should seek guidance from the legal or compliance department, right? We don't need to know all of this stuff, but we need to know where to ask. All right, so what the Institute does in the handbook, it provides these sections on guidance and then these recommended procedures. So stay informed, review procedures. You hear me say this all the time. The Institute loves the word monitor. Here's where we're using that again. Review those procedures. We need to monitor, and then maintain copies of current files. So let's go ahead and end Standard 1A with one of our questions. I'll give you a second to pause and read through this. Notice the question. Has Brown violated Standard 1A knowledge of the law? All right, so this is a common question, at least if I were making up these questions. This would be a common question. We have the STEM up there. All right, we're in Germany. We have an IPO. We have an underwriting syndicate with us, Delta, and Omega. Japan has no regulations regarding executives participating in the IPO. So what Brown does is she says, "Oh, I'll go ahead and take some of these, and I'll do it through our partner in the underwriting syndicate." So does that sound like something that we want to be doing? So notice our choices here. Have we violated? Well, there's a no and a yes. And then there could be a no and a yes and a yes. Remember, there's only three choices, so you can't have a no, a yes, and a maybe. Although maybe the Institute could say maybe based on this and this and this, but that sounds too complexified. All right, so no, we have two no's. The standard does not forbid. We probably don't like that one. No, because the underwriting process is shared. And how about a yes because of the stricter rules? So there we go. There's the bolded answer. This is an application of what we just talked about with those more strict and less strict. Notice that in the question STEM, there is no word about stricter or less strict or more strict. All we're told is that in Japan, there are no regulations, so that's kind of the signal about the stricter. All right, how about Part B in the standard? Independence and objectivity. There is the standard as it's written in the handbook. We must not offer or solicit or accept any gift or benefit compensation or consideration that reasonably, oh, there's a key word in there, reasonably could be expected to compromise, independence and objectivity. I always tell this story to my students. I say, imagine that you're an analyst for one of the ratings agencies, and your job is to rate a bond issued by some, large, well-known company. And so the CFO calls you and says, hey, we're going to land an airplane in your backyard or in your front street. Be there at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. Bring your tennis racket and your golf clubs and your swimming costume. We're going to spend the day at the country club. We're going to go swimming. And we'll see, our operations. And I'll introduce you to the board and all the executive leadership team. Don't eat before you get here. We're going to have lobster for breakfast. And so, you go there and you think, man, these are the nicest people ever. Boy, does that compromise your independence and objectivity? Sure sounds like it. So let's go ahead and work through a good question here. This is one of the Institute's questions here. So let's look down at the question first. Which of the following was least likely to violate? Least likely. So make sure that you remember to read. Is it least likely? Is it most likely? All right, so let's talk about keynote speaker, hosted by third-party investment managers, pension fund. The manager offers to cover all conference and travel costs. Make the conference registrations free for 3 additional members of the team. Now, here's the really cool thing that Institute and we make these questions sound like they're so good. To ensure that the conference obtains the best speaker. So here's a kind of a sentence that says, hey, you know what? It's okay. This makes perfect sense, right? Exclusive golf outing for the day on a local championship caliber golf course, which is the least likely. All right, so we accept the offer only to have conference-related expenses paid. May accept the offer and may attend the exclusive golf outing at the expense. Long may accept the entire package. Well, what do we want to do? Of course, we want to accept the entire package of incentives because it sounds like a super fun time, but we probably don't want to do that. So correct answer is, of course, A. This is where the Institute, gets really interesting. And that's why I referenced that word reasonable back there. Accepting paid travel would not compromise one's independence. Notice we also have in that very first, at times, however. Yeah. All right, so that makes sense. B and C are incorrect because of those added benefits. All right, so let's go ahead and spend some time talking about guidance. Remember that I said this in other recordings. Hopefully you remember this. I try to teach my students this, especially during COVID when we had take-home exams. And I try to teach this to my children that, look, if you have integrity in small things, then you'll have integrity in big things. So this is really what the Institute is saying. They're saying just what my mother said. You know what, Jimmy, those chocolate chip cookies over there, they're for all of us. Don't eat any of those before dinner, but I'm going out take your sister for a walk here. I'm going to leave you home all alone. Back in those days, there were no cameras around to see, but my mother would know if I ate a cookie. So, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to maintain our independence and objectivity. Of course, we can have external sources that may influence, just like the example that we just talked about. But there could be internal pressure, to issue favorable reports or to, pursue some kind of behavior that puts us in favor with our colleagues or our supervisors. Now look down at the bottom 2 circle points, right? What are the important words there? Disclose, disclose, disclose. We didn't really have that issue in the first problem, but you know what? If we're going to accept a gift, let's go ahead and make sure that everybody knows about it. Hey, I accepted this gift and it was, for me to get on a train and go from here to there. They paid for it. And I think it's reasonable. We all think it's reasonable, but let's make sure that everybody knows about it. Here's a great question. We've got the buy side, we have the sell side, and of course, you got 2 groups of individuals over here, and those 2 groups of individuals, sometimes they interact with each other, and sometimes business topics come up. And so, boy, imagine 4 people here, and they get together and have lunch, and they say, oh boy, if you scratch my back, maybe I could scratch your back. And so we need to make sure, look at the bottom bullet point there, must maintain their independence. All right, second part here on guidance, custodial relationships. We talk at length throughout the level 1 and level 2 and level 3 about third-party risk and custodians, and so we need to make certain that we do everything that we've said here prior to this slide deck. And prior to this particular slide, we should not accept gifts that may appear, right? May appear. Performance measure and attribution, what are we saying? We're saying, look, let's go ahead and use the internal rate of return. Let's use it for the longest possible period that we can. And let's go ahead and say, you know what, this is what we're doing. This is what I did. And here is my attribution analysis. Here is the measure of my performance or the performance of all of these portfolios. The great example is one of my sons is a golfer, and he learned valuable lesson when he was a young golfer competing in one of his first tournaments. And he said, "You know what, Dad? There was I made an 8 or a 9. I can't remember what it was on a hole, and I counted all my strokes, and I put down an 8 or a 9 on the scorecard, and I wasn't very happy about it, but that's what I got." And so that's pretty much what the Institute is asking us to do here. Manager selection, this can get, super sketchy. I think that's a word that my children use here when we're trying to hire managers. And so what if, we have this one fund manager that comes to us and says, "Oh, if you hire me, I'll take you golfing every other week or something." So we need to make sure that we separate, those kinds of relationships. And then issuer paid research here. We need to make sure that we disclose the nature of that compensation. Remember, it could be some kind of a flat fee. It could be compensation that's tied to performance, as long as it's reasonable, right? And we make sure that we disclose it. And then finally here, travel funding. We need to make sure that we go ahead and pay for our own travel, but we can accept something if it's reasonable. I think back in the old days, the Institute had kind of a limit on this number. If I remember correctly, I don't remember what that number was, a dollar amount. But then, a dollar amount of this and a dollar amount of that, they're probably like comparing apples and oranges, even though money is fungible, right? So notice that's the last bullet point there, to avoid any appearance of being compromised. Cover all necessary travel expenses, and that should make perfect sense. So here are the recommended procedures. We want to protect the integrity of our opinions, so we need to establish policies that say something like, I'm totally unbiased, but here are some things down here that I might disclose. We can have restricted lists. We can have special cost arrangements that are restricted. And so as long as these things are outlined, let me go back here to this. Protect the integrity. We need to establish policies. So you write a policy and then you monitor the policy throughout. Limit gifts. We've talked about that. Restrict investments, and then review the procedures. This is that word monitor that I was saying earlier. A formal written policy, that makes sense, and appointment of a compliance officer. So here's one of our questions. Notice down here, which of the following individuals has violated this standard? So we have two people, Rodriguez and Lee. So either one or both of them went ahead and violated. So let's go ahead and read the question stem. Tip from a friend that the pension fund is searching for a new external fund manager. Selection manner is a tennis player, frequently visits the local tennis club. And so Rodriguez intends to establish a close rapport with the selection manager, Peter Lee. Lee and Rodriguez knew each other since their college days or some days before. So Rodriguez gifts Lee an expensive membership to the tennis club and pays for several lunches at the tennis club. Well, that doesn't sound like something that we want to do. So both of them have violated. Lee should not accept the gifts because it may impair his independence, but Rodriguez knowingly tried to influence theirs. How about misrepresentation? Let's see, investment analysis, recommendations, actions, or other professional activities. So, this is what we are. Here we are. this is what we look like. This is our experience. This is our performance, right? Let's take a look at a quick example here. Gray recommends the purchase of a mutual fund solely in treasuries. So he makes two statements. So look down at the question. This is similar to what we had just before. Statement 1 violate, statement 2 violate. Do they both violate or neither violate? In this case, we went with neither as part A. All right, so what is statement 1? The payment of the bonds is guaranteed by the U.S. government. The default risk of the bonds is virtually zero. Yeah, boy, we're having another conversation about debt limits and U.S. Treasuries not becoming default risk free. I mean, that sounds like an accurate statement to me. We can editorialize and conversate about what that means, but default risk of bonds is virtually zero. Now, be careful. This is what I would do if I were creating the question. I would say, therefore, the default risk and the interest rate risk of the bonds is virtually zero. Well, that thing is totally right out of the book. But the default risk component there, that sounds about right. So how about statement 2? If you invest in the fund, you will earn a 10% return each year based on historical performance. Boy, we don't like that one at all. So which one here? Statement 1 is a factual statement. That's what we thought about before, so that makes sense. Statement 2 guarantees return. So what do we like? Only statement 2 violated the standards. All right, so let's work through the guidance here. So look at the highlighted words. Manipulation of facts, we just saw that a little bit ago. Omission of information. So this is an important part here. And plagiarism. All right, prohibited from guaranteeing returns, falsified performance records. Yeah, this is one that I didn't have to worry about when I went through the program, or at least I don't remember having to worry about social media. I'm not sure I don't even know what that term meant back 20 years ago or so. So it should not be abused. You know, regular readers of the Wall Street Journal will know about multiple examples where people use Twitter to pump up the price of a share of stock, and then they go sell it before everyone becomes the wiser. I don't know anything about social media. I'm sure you guys know more about it there. Plagiarism strictly prohibited here. All right, so how about the impact on investment practice? Yeah, should not misrepresent their academic qualifications, firm performance history, credentials, or service. So look at the second time point. Exercise care when using third-party information. We say this regularly throughout all three levels, that when we rely on third party, we need to make certain that that third party, pretty much operates like we do. Remember that misrepresent the academic qualifications. I mean, I can't come to you and say, hey, you know what? I do have a PhD in finance and I do hold the CFA designation. That makes me way smarter than everybody else out there. I can't make that. I can't make that claim, nor would I feel comfortable making that claim. All right, we should use appropriate benchmarks. Boy, and this goes back to the policy statement, and I love linking, these earlier LOSs to the policy statement, because remember now, when we put this together, we're going to look at the client's risk and return objectives and all of their constraints, and we're going to put together a portfolio. And what we need to do is compare that portfolio to something else. Sometimes that benchmark might reasonably be the S&P 500 index, but we may have to put together our own benchmark that's unique for that individual client. And so use the appropriate benchmark. That's a great exam question. Reliable and accurate pricing. Yeah, look at the note down there. Does not require a benchmark to be provided in order to comply. All right, you guys know way more about this. Social media. Distribute the same information to all current and potential clients. So I'm going to go ahead and go out on a limb here and pretend like I know about social media. So you have an Instagram account. Maybe you allow certain of your clients access to that Instagram account, and other clients don't have access to that account. And so a question stem could be, hey, you put a buy recommendation to your Instagram, and then you go to lunch, and you take a nap, and then you come back and you email all your clients that same kind of information. That sounds like a violation of this particular standard. Communication should comply with the code and standard. That makes perfect sense. Yeah. Research models are the property of the firm, so you need to make sure you're careful that if you go ahead and put something out on social media, that it doesn't violate privacy issues, it doesn't violate any proprietary issues as well. Yeah, this is another good question. Look at that second diamond point. Prohibited from reissuing previously released reports, especially if they were not ours. Plagiarism without acknowledging. So here are a couple of examples. I mean, I tell my students this all the time. They say, hey, Jim, do you want us to use this form for our references? Do you want us to use this form? And I say, I really don't care what form you use. Just make sure you let me know where you got it. All right, so what does that mean? You can't take credit for a research report. You can't copy any part of a report without acknowledgement. You have to acknowledge the graphs and charts. If you have a proprietary model that you're using, which would include spreadsheets, you need to ask for permission. Look at that bottom there. For example, the following quotes attribute to a leading expert or a financial guru. That's weak attribution. You should acknowledge the authors directly. All right, how about recommendations here? Written list of the firm's services and qualifications of each member. There's verification of third-party information. Update web pages regularly. There's the monitoring and the update. Developing a plagiarism policy. All right, so let's end misrepresentation with a question that says, hey, is there a violation? Notice we've gone with 2 no's and 1 yes. All right, so here we are. We're preparing, a briefing for clients. Explain various financial concepts such as price earnings and dividend yield. He finds these descriptions on a finance blog and copies these explanations verbatim. Boy, I wonder if we needed that verbatim in parentheses there to see if there's a violation without acknowledging the authors. Is this a violation? Let's see what we come up with. No, because these concepts are common finance jargon. Boy, that sounds like a reasonable answer. No, because he does not need to acknowledge the original authors. Yeah, how about B? Yes, because he failed to reference the original authors. And you know what? Sometimes you come across a quote or something and you really can't quite find the author. Sometimes, maybe it's a video and the video is anonymous. I mean, there are ways to make sure that you reference that original author. All right, misconduct. Let's see. Dishonesty, fraud, deceit reflects adversely on the professional reputation. There's my favorite word in there, integrity or competence. I'm going to take you back to a great sports example. I wonder if you guys were even alive. This might have been 20 years ago. Maybe it was 25 years ago. There was a bit of a fight during an NBA game, and these 2 guys, they squared off, and they were getting ready to duke it out. And the one guy was bigger than the other guy, and the other guy, he kind of backed away, and he went over and he laid down on the scorer's table, and some fan threw popcorn on him, and this player went into the audience, and there was a bit of a brouhaha in the stands. And so when I see stuff like that, I always think to myself, suppose the dude who threw the popcorn on the player, suppose that guy held the CFA designation. I mean, that sounds an awful lot like reflects adversely on professional reputation. And we see this all the time where people do stuff and it's recorded. And sooner or later, they're going to find out who that person is, whether it's, artificial intelligence and, face recognition stuff, or somebody else who doesn't like you saying, hey, look, that was Jim over there who was throwing the popcorn. All right, so let's go ahead and see if these actions violate the code of standards. So what did Simon do? Trust investment officer. He enjoys lunching every day with friends at the country club, where clients have observed him having numerous drinks. All right, numerous. I don't really know what that means, but if I had numerous drinks at lunch, there's no way I could go back and teach, or no way I could make one of these videos here. He's clearly intoxicated while making investment decisions. Yeah, this doesn't sound like anything. Yes, excessive drinking at lunch, subsequent intoxication. yeah, this reflects poorly on him, the employer, the investment industry, and how about just all humanity in general? All right, so what about guidance here? Conduct that paints a bad picture, right, related to the member or the candidate's professional life. Yeah, may not be illegal. I don't know that it's illegal throwing popcorn. Or go back to that great Seinfeld episode where Newman and Kramer they poured beer on one of the relief pitchers out in the bullpen. I mean, that doesn't sound like it's legal or illegal. Although, with athletes and their interaction with fans, maybe it ought to be illegal to invade their space. All right, develop a code of ethics, list of potential violations. There's another part of this development of a code of ethics. That makes perfect sense. Conducting background checks. All right, so let's end with another. Did we violate? Notice we have two yeses in this one here, yes and no and yes. So we're an investment analyst, member of Green Earth Organization, champions environmental protection. Chen organizes a rally to protest the government's increase in the use of plastic bags. Okay, this sounds all reasonable here. During the rally, Chen was arrested, fined 200 euros. But in the contract signed, any employee arrested for committing offenses within the company is immediately terminated. All right, so is this a violation? Yes, because she was arrested and fined. No, because she didn't violate the code. Or yes, because she violated the employment contract with her employee. Yeah. She may get fired, but she didn't violate the code. Personal convictions and engage in lawful acts of civil disobedience. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. All right, how about the last one, competence? So this is a new one. So I would look for a question. I mean, if the CFA Institute thought that it was important to add this to this standard, then it sounds to me like it's a very likely question to show up. So what does this one tell us? Maintain competence necessary to fulfill their professional responsibilities. So think about it. You're going through 300 hours here in level 1, 300 in level 2, 300 in level 3. Then you have to have the work experience. Then you have to perform on the exams. You got to do all that stuff. But that's not the end of it. You guys remember graduation speeches. I go to 2 graduations every year, so I hear this all the time. And every graduation speaker, or at least most graduation speakers, say, hey, this is not the end of your life. This is just the beginning. Well, it's the same thing applies here. So what we need to do is have that spark in our brain that says, okay, I've done this. I'm super proud, but I need to continue to maintain and improve. This is why I do all this stuff. This is why I read the Wall Street Journal every day. This is why I read journal articles every day. This is why I do all this stuff, so that I can continue to learn and learn. All right, how about guidance here? In order for us to act with integrity and competence and diligence, we need to know stuff, right? So look at these words: knowledge, skills, abilities, underlying principles. So the question then becomes, how do we do this? And the answer is, well, we do whatever it takes for us to maintain and improve. Now, there's one probably a little bit of a trick question. Look down at the bottom. That doesn't mean that if we have the knowledge and the skills and the abilities that we're always going to be right. So just because we do all this good work, perform our due diligence, we have integrity, we're not unduly influenced by anybody out there, and we make a recommendation that Procter & Gamble is going to increase by 10%, and then a year later, Procter & Gamble stock price is down 90%. Well, that doesn't mean that we have failed and violated this standard. What it means is that we need to learn from our mistakes. Yeah, look at, it does not mandate participation in a particular continuing education program, but it says something like, you know what, you need to go ahead and make sure that you do something, whatever that means. So here's the whatever that means. Professional development, certifications, and designations. I know where I teach, we have a whole bunch of certifications in finance and in nursing and engineering and all those kinds of things. And it might be, 3 or 4 different kinds of classes. Conferences and seminars, training, studying, somewhere down there it doesn't say read the Wall Street Journal, but I'm not sure that the Institute could get away with that. All right, one final exam question here. Notice that bolded at the very top. That's going to be important. So she's recently transitioned from her role as a senior analyst to a position head of global equity research. All right. She's responsible for overseeing the firm's global equity research team. Overseeing. All right. So to prepare, she reads extensively on global market trends, attends investing conferences, and holds regular meetings with her teams. All right. So is she in compliance or has she violated this? Well, notice, and this is a great question because it kind of leads you down the path. You want to say something like, yeah, it looks like look at Jim. She did all the stuff that you just told us. Global market, conferences, regular meetings. But what didn't she do? She did not undertake any training on supervisory responsibility. So whatever that means, how to be a supervisor is very different than how to evaluate the duration of a bond or shares of stock and the systematic risk by companies in Germany or Spain. All right, that takes us through professionalism. Next up is Standard 2, integrity of capital markets. So what I want you to do after every one of these recordings, I want you to get out that handbook and I want you to go through those 39 or 40. Don't go through all of them. Just go through the ones that relate to professionalism. Now, sometimes it won't be as obvious as it will be on the exam, but what I want you to do is after all 7 of these, I want you to have covered all 40 because after that 7th, I'm going to have you go and take 30 minutes and go ahead and practice that exam. So, hey, thanks for watching and good luck studying.